Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog, which is coming to you again from New York City. If you've been watching the vlog for the last 2-3 days, you know that I'm in New York. I used to live here. I moved to Tennessee, which you know if you've been following the vlog for a while. I'm back visiting for a few days, and then I go back to Tennessee. So I don't have the time that I usually have to do the usual linking to articles and doing research. I still want to visit with everybody, so I'm taking the opportunity to talk about other things that I think are important to talk about. So today I want to talk about Lebanon. Lebanon, though, keep in mind, is part of a much larger phenomenon that's occurring these days across the Middle East. You're seeing, well, not just Middle East, Hong Kong, we all know about the riots in Hong Kong. And actually, Hong Kong, I don't know if I would call them, maybe some isolated cases you could call them riots, but they're, I guess, violent demonstrations. That's how you would characterize it. But you're seeing demonstrations, some violent, some hopefully not so violent, but you're seeing them in Iraq, you're seeing them in Iran. They all have a common characteristic, these demonstrations, which is a rebellion against the authorities, against corruption. But what's important about Lebanon and Iraq, we're seeing demonstrations in Iraq and then in Iran. They're all about the same subject, which is the Ayatollahs, which is Iran. Well, obviously in Iran, you're talking about the leadership, the Ayatollahs, but if you're talking about Iraq and Lebanon, then you're talking about just the influence of Iran in those two countries. In the case of Iraq, you have strong bonds between the Shiite majority and Iran, the Iranian government, because the Iranians are Shiites too. So there's that bond there. And then you have the same thing in Lebanon. Well, in Lebanon, as you know, there are three separate main groups. There's the Christians, there are the Sunni Muslims, and then there are the Shiite Muslims. The Shiite Muslims are Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the, I guess, a military proxy, a cat's paw for Iran. Now, what's interesting in Lebanon these days is that in the past there have been some demonstrations by the Sunnis and the Christians, but now you're seeing the Shiites, they're demonstrating too. Part of it is, and this is credit to Donald Trump, pulling out of the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, and reimposing and increasing the sanctions on Iran. They seem to be working. That's what's causing the problem. We're talking specifically now about Lebanon. Hezbollah, they bought their loyalty. The reason that the Shiites are loyal to Hezbollah is because they don't believe this nonsense, I don't think, about resisting Israel. Israel actually has no interest in anybody if anybody leaves them alone. It's only when they're attacked, and then they respond. So the Lebanese understand that Hezbollah is not some kind of resistance against Israel, because the only reason that Israel ever would attack Lebanon is because of Hezbollah, because of their presence. If Hezbollah were not there, there would be no threat from Israel. And in fact, Israel and Lebanon, they had signed a peace treaty a long time ago. Unfortunately, the Christian leader who signed that treaty, he was assassinated. Gamaliel was his name, Gamaliel. And that blew up the treaty. And then Iran slowly but surely established Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon. But they weren't just a paramilitary group, and they're really a full-fledged army by now. That's how the Israelis view them. But they provided social services. They also provided pensions and medical care for their fighters in their military unit. That's falling apart now because Hezbollah is not getting the money they were getting from Iran. They are having to cut salaries, they are having to cut services, and the result is that you see the Shiites rebelling too, or starting to. Now, what you are also seeing is a collapse of their financial system because the country is rife with corruption, number one, but number two, the banks, because they are connected with Hezbollah, the Lebanese banks are finding it harder and harder to operate. They are having trouble paying interest on deposits. They are having trouble the banks have been closed. The banks have been closed for a while because the banks have no money to give to the depositors. The country is falling apart. And one result, an important result is, just to recap, again, everybody might already be familiar with this system that they have in Lebanon, but because you have these three groups, the Christians, the Sunni Muslims, and the Shiite Muslims, they divide power because, as in most of the Middle East, there's a lot of tribalism, and the result is you have to cater to these various groups. So they have a parliamentary system. The president of Lebanon is always a Christian. The prime minister is always a Sunni Muslim, and I honestly forget the position of, there's another position that the Shiite Muslim gets. So Saad Hariri, whose father was assassinated by Hezbollah, he was the prime minister. He recently resigned. He just said, I'm resigning from the government. So Lebanon has no prime minister at the moment. You have Hassan Nasrallah, who does not have an official position, but who is the real power because he heads Hezbollah, which is more powerful than the Lebanese army, which cooperates with Hezbollah in any case. Now, what these demonstrators are demonstrating for is they want the entire government to resign. The people of Lebanon consider everybody in the government corrupt, and they want them all out, including Nasrallah. And that's what they chant in their demonstrations, Nasrallah too, or Nasrallah is one of them too. So Iran has a real problem that their influence seems to be waning across the Middle East. Their quest to build a Persian Empire, to rebuild the Persian Empire, that is seriously at risk now. Because also, as I said, in Iraq, even the Shiite Iraqis, they are tired of Iran having influence in their country. They recently demonstrated against the Iranian embassy in Iraq. They burned an Iranian flag. That tells you how serious it is over there. So the point I want to get to in Lebanon is that Hezbollah has been getting a free ride for all this time. Now, what do I mean by a free ride? I mean, they are the real influence. They are the real power in Lebanon because they can veto anything that the other parties in Lebanon want to do because they have the military power. So nothing can be done without Nasrallah's okay. He is the real power. But at the same time as being the real power, Hezbollah does not have to govern. They have some representatives in the Lebanese parliament, but Hezbollah is not responsible for running the country. So my suggestion, what I would urge, is that the other officials in the Lebanese government, everybody who is not in Hezbollah, they should just resign. Say, okay, Hezbollah, you're the real power, you govern, we're quitting. We quit, we're stepping down, you run the country. And then let's see how long Nasrallah and Hezbollah are able to run Lebanon with all the problems that Lebanon has, because nobody is going to lend money or send foreign aid to Lebanon that is governed entirely by Hezbollah. Hezbollah, I am pretty sure, does not have the capability of actually governing Lebanon. All they know how to do is to smuggle in rockets and threaten Israel and have these march around with their uniforms and their flags. If they had to be responsible for the power, for the water, for the financial system, for the infrastructure, for the sewers, for the highways, the roads, if Hezbollah had to be responsible for everything in Lebanon, I think that they would have a real problem. And I'm sure there would come a point where, I think it's already starting, where Nasrallah would say to the other parties, let's talk, let's negotiate, let's see if we could come up with a solution. My advice to those other parties is to say, no, you're the real power. This is the deal. You resign completely, you disarm, you leave the government totally, you let us govern. That's the deal. If you don't want to do that, then we quit, we step aside, you run the country. You run the country or we run the country. There is no in between. That is my advice. And I would just say as a final word that if these other parties were courageous enough to do that, that they would have the whole Lebanese people, except for Hezbollah, behind them. They would also have the United States behind them. They would also have, I think, the rest of the world behind them, except for the Europeans, maybe France, because they are so craven that I just don't trust them to do anything, to be honest, to do the right thing. But time will tell. We'll see what happens. That is my vlog for today. Thanks again for stopping by. Thumbs up if you like the vlog. Share it with anybody you think would like the vlog too. Got any comments? Put them in the comment section below the vlog. Subscribe. I love getting subscribers. And finally, come back and see me again. I look forward to seeing all of you again. And until I do, bye.